You are listening to Fruitless, a podcast hosted by me, Josiah Sutton. This is episode 13, To Tradition and Back, featuring Joseph. Again to another exciting episode of Fruitless. I'm joined today by Joseph. Hello, Joseph.
Hey, Josiah.
Joseph is
on for the first time of this podcast.
Yeah, I was gonna say Joseph was on an old VLVC episode that maybe I'll bump onto this feed again at some point about Jack Chick. So it's like I think you're cementing yourself as someone who kind of shows it up to talk about weird religious stuff. Because that's what we're doing again today.
It's long been an interest of mine. Like back growing up evangelical, my dad got into like the evangelical anti-cult movement, which called out like Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses a lot. And like he had a bunch of books lying around about that. So like I really got kind of fixated on those things from an early age.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. My dad is really into a couple of those guys, but I'm blanking on the names. That's an interesting way to kind of introduce you to it. I think we both have just like a fascination in weird stuff, you know?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
So, yeah, you wanted to come on and talk about the Evangelical Orthodox Church and kind of some personal history with that and a local church here. Yeah, in where you're at. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a church I attended when I was in college, was formerly affiliated with the Evangelical Orthodox Church. It became part of the Antiochian Orthodox Church later, but that's really the condensed version of the history. Is that one denomination just straight up joined the Antiochian Orthodox Church.
Yeah. Well, and I think if somebody's like familiar with Christian denominations off the top of your head, automatically I feel like the Evangelical Orthodox, at least for me, just sets off a bunch of bells in my head where I'm like, wait, what is that? Like, that's a combination that I have no idea what to do with. So can we kind of break down to like where each aspect of those two words kind of comes from with this movement?
Yeah. So they were evangelicals in the beginning because of their connection to Campus Crusade for Christ. Like that was the organization that they came for. I believe it's now called Cru.
Yeah, they thought the crusade thing might not be the...
So they just took like the first syllable of the most offensive word and made it their whole thing. That was their rebrand. Yeah, but in 1968 they were called Campus Crusade for Christ, and they were an evangelical organization led by Bill Bright, kind of a parachurch campus ministry. And Peter Gilquist was the guy who became really dissatisfied with the parachurch ministry aspect of it. Like he felt it wasn't connecting people into actual churches. It was just sort of creating this thing you do while you're in college. Which is in a weird way what it became for me, but that's not where most of the denomination wound up.
Right. So it kind of comes out of this like old evangelical, like, the evangelizing at colleges kind of thing. I know it vaguely has a relationship, like the old days in the 60s and 70s, it had this relationship with like the Jesus movement and kind of the restorationist impulse. Like they kind of back to the basics Protestants kind of want to return to what the original faith was like. Yeah. And so then how did those folks land in Eastern Orthodoxy?
Well, it really began with the restorationist impulse. Like that's, I don't know, something I find restorationism in general is just something I can find fascinating in that like it can lead to like totally mainline denominations like the Disciples of Christ. It can lead to Mormons, and it can lead to the Community of Christ, who are both of those things.
Right.
But the Evangelical Orthodox Church began with that idea. Like, let's go back to the basics. Let's try to restore the original church as it was. But then they also began to accept the notion that, well, maybe the point of this isn't to accept, this discontinuity, this idea that's prevalent in a lot of restorationist churches that like there was a time when the church sort of disappeared from the earth. Like the true church was not with us. And they're like, I don't think God would allow that. So what does that mean for us?
Yeah. Yeah, right. Because that's the problem with a lot of Protestant restorationists is because they have to eventually believe that the church went away.
Yeah,
and that seems wrong. That's always felt wrong to me, even as a Reformed kid growing up.
Yeah, and I was definitely drawn to that idea when I was first drawn to Orthodoxy. Like that just sort of made intuitive sense to me, and that's and so initially I looked into Catholicism, but then just like doing more reading and like finding out more things, like I became attracted to the Orthodox side, and that's essentially what happened to these former Campus Crusade leaders. And so what they studied church history, and they formed in 1975 what they called the New Covenant Apostolic Order, which they renamed the Evangelical Orthodox Church.
Yeah, so what are they in communion with? Just like the whole Eastern Orthodox Church, or are they kind of like a sect?
They started out as just a sect, like just like another essentially Protestant sect that happened to like adopt a lot of Orthodox practice, although kind of syncretically and with a lot of innovation at first. That they, as they went into more dialogue with Orthodox people, they brought it into greater conformity with Orthodox practice.
Okay.
But like it was a long process of dialogue. Like in 1987, they were received en masse, like 1,700 of their 2,500 members. It was a fairly small group, but they did have like a nationwide presence. They were in Memphis, and they were also in California, throughout the Midwest. And they were received en masse. Their clergy were received first as laymen and then like ordained en masse shortly thereafter.
Okay, yeah.
But they were brought into full communion with the Antiochian Orthodox Church, which is in turn in communion with the Russian Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Church in America, the Greek Orthodox Church. Did I say that one?
No.
Romanian, Ukrainian, Bulgarian, etc.
So it's interesting that so what kind of like syncretisms still like I guess remain in the church, like by the time, because this happened in like you said the 70s and 80s, by like the time you were like attending, did it have like a charismatic wing to it still and stuff like that, or was it at that point basically an Orthodox church?
It was basically an Orthodox church at that point. Like
okay.
The lead pastor was part of the EOC, but like he had pretty much brought himself into full conformity. Like I guess you could say his preaching style still had some of that old Baptist influence. But like that's really about the extent of it, because that's really about the extent of where creative innovation is allowed within a strict Orthodox church. Like liturgically, they're probably one of the most conservative groups there is. Like everything is still done all in chanting. It feels like you're part of something very ancient, in a really compelling way. But like everything is pretty strictly regimented. Like there were controversies when the EOC was sort of absorbed gradually, because many of them developed a sort of pan-Orthodox practice, and they were forced to kind of be in conformity with Arab practice. That's the bishop who ultimately accepted them after they were rejected by the Patriarch of Constantinople.
That's all super interesting, and like I can like see it. I can see how it happened, because I the brief period of my life that I was interested in Orthodoxy was during kind of like I don't know, I had a really, really Protestant mentality where I was like, the problem with Christianity is we got away from its mere basics, its meaning, and so like Catholicism was impossible to me to even imagine that, because that seemed to represent everything that it's come away from. But something about the Orthodox Church felt like that was the one of the liturgical things that like, oh, I'm going back to the basics. They seem to have more of a claim to that, which I don't know if they really should or not, but they do kind of have that claim in a lot of people's heads.
I mean, like there is a more complex history than just like this is what St. John Chrysostom gave us in the 4th century, and this is what we do today. Like there has been innovation over the centuries, but it's been like relatively slow, I would say, compared to like what you might see in a Novus Ordo Mass, for example.
Right.
And also just like the discovery like as for the Evangelical Orthodox Church, like it began with this this process of like intensive study, and like they've got really into church history, and they found the earliest Christians, like they worship liturgically. Like we can see that in like Justin Martyr, you can see that in all these other very early writers. And they had a very high view of the sacraments, which is another thing the EOC adapted pretty heavily. Although initially, as they had kind of developed their own liturgy, they developed the novel practice of blessing the bread communally and then breaking into small groups to eat it.
Which is like kind of a that would be a no-no, I think, in the Orthodox Church, right?
Well, like the book I'm using as a source is Turning to Tradition by Father Oliver Herbel. Like this is where I learned a lot about the EOC's history, like more so than from being part of it, really. Like I never really got to dive deep into that with Father John Foy or anyone else. But that book, it says like this is like kind of contradictory to the entire way Orthodox think about communion. Like it's supposed to be shared with the entire church. It's not an opportunity to fragment, it's an opportunity to come together.
Right.
But obviously the practice was dropped in time, and in time they were convinced to start using icons. Like they, their practice evolved relatively quickly until it was brought into total conformity with like the
Orthodox Church. Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, and it's interesting that the members decided to do it the way they did that there, because it wasn't like they just chose to just all convert to Orthodoxy. You know what I mean? Like directly. Like it was a process of starting their own church and then integrating the church eventually into which that itself is very interesting. I don't know. Like, yeah.
I mean, because like Protestant history is full of a lot of denominational mergers, the Methodists and the United Brethren, just off the top of my head. Like,
well, or, I can speak from my own church, the Episcopal Church and the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, both have an ecumenical kind of merged relationship at this point. Which was a pretty easy process to my understanding, because they were both liberal mainline. The only thing I might be incorrect on this, but the only thing I think they had to do was the Episcopal Church has, like an apostolic notion of bishops and priests and all that. So, and the ELCA didn't, so they just had to like go and like lay hands on every ELCA like priest. Okay. And that was about the only thing they had to do.
Okay. Yeah. This was like definitely a much more complicated process, because initially the EOC sought to be just received in whole into the Orthodox Church without having to have hands laid on anything. They laid hands on each other, and their initial belief was that at that point they received a sort of charismatic apostolic succession.
Right.
They were received into apostolic succession by the Holy Spirit, and that gave them a great amount of, authority. And like, there are some who have criticized the early group as cult-like, which I wasn't around for that, so I can't really testify to it. I will say I did not get that impression of the modern Orthodox Church. Like, there's definitely areas where I differ from it, but cult-like is not a descriptor I'd use.
Well, I could see, I don't know about the EOC, but like just thinking of Campus Crusades and some of the campus ministries I've like seen and been around, that's kind of a problem that kind of forms in a lot of those environments. So I could see the early days when it still has that kind of thing.
And especially when you've also got these notions that we should have archbishops, and like we should have like a very strict hierarchy, and we should be calling priests father, and like like having these like, more hierarchical notions that like they effectively had to tone down in order to become accepted as part of Orthodoxy.
So they were even more intense about that stuff than the Eastern Orthodox.
In terms of like notions of like church authority, yes.
Wow, that's interesting, because doesn't the, I mean, it's not as strong as the Catholic Church, but the Eastern Orthodox Church does have, like, if you compare it to a Baptist church, it has a pretty strong sense of hierarchy. That's interesting. It's interesting they went so hard on that.
Yeah. And I mean, just like kind of in some potentially abusive ways, even like there's been testimony from former members that they were told to divorce spouses who weren't ready to join the church, or probably the worst thing I read in turning to tradition about it. If you want the juicy goss.
Oh yeah, of course we do.
Is that they encouraged someone who is diabetic to stop taking their medication.
Holy shit!
On belief of like personal revelation from God, and that they still had a lot of charismatic impulses that they had to like tone down. Like I remember in Francis's episode of this podcast talking about orthodoxy. Like he talked about like he came to reject charismatic Christianity as just like, you know, being too open to the idea of personal revelation from God. And these guys definitely had that kind of openness that he would critique and say was absent from orthodoxy, but in their case, it led them to orthodoxy.
Well, that's interesting because that kind of stuff sounds more charismatic to me. That kind of abuse.
Yeah.
They'll like, oh, God told me you need to stop taking your medicine.
Yeah, no, they definitely like they came from that world and they still had some of the markings of it, and they still tried to consciously maintain that to some extent because like they weren't fully integrated into the Antiochian Orthodox Church. They were like a special vicariate, I believe is the word. So like they were all under one bishop across the country, and they had kind of the right to retain some of their self-consciously evangelical identity that did things like door-to-door ministries, you know, like kind of classic evangelical shit, and like but in the pursuit of like bringing people into the Orthodox Church.
Yeah, so did the Orthodox kind of, I don't know, kind of see that in the same way as like when like a church holds on to like folk practices or whatever, you know, like I don't know, like I think
it was kind of understood like that. Like
that's really interesting, huh?
In one of the books I read when I was looking into Orthodoxy for the first time it's a conversion narrative from a former Episcopalian, I believe. She talked about how like Thanksgiving technically falls during a fasting period because it's before Christmas, but like exemption is given for local tradition. And she also just kind of talked about how Americans hate to think about Thanksgiving as a local tradition. Like it's so widely celebrated here, but it's just like, yeah, here's a quirky folk thing, Thanksgiving. And but like there was, I think, concern from a lot of Orthodox because it's like one of the few organizations that like people have to to kind of feel connected to their ethnic identity in the US in a lot of ways. Like there was even a Greek government official who, because the Antiochians were not like the first choice. They first went to, like they were first in dialogue with the OCA, the Orthodox Church in America, which is what became of the Russian Orthodox Church and is now de facto independent from them. De jure is more controversial, but yeah, so they first tried with the Orthodox Church in America. Then at one point they were advised to speak with the ecumenical patriarch, and who like technically oversees only a very small community in Turkey proper because he's not allowed to be the patriarch of Greece by the Turkish government. But like is considered kind of the spiritual head of the Greek Orthodox world, and people were like concerned that if these people were brought into the Greek Orthodox Church, it would damage their ability to like conserve Hellenic culture in the Americas, and that it would essentially be like, you know, a colonizing mission of this little ethnic community, which is interesting because I don't know, it is kind of cool to see a bunch of like primarily white people in the South like integrate themselves into an Arab tradition. Like that was interesting to me. Like, you know, they call the priest's wife Khoria. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. They definitely pronounced it wrong. But that's what they were going for, I believe. You know, they like used the Arab chants. They were under the jurisdiction of the Patriarch of Antioch, who lives in Syria, or did.
Okay.
I think he's in exile currently. Not in the country. But
yeah, for other geopolitical reasons, I assume.
Yeah, when I was there, he was still in Syria, I believe.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that's incredibly interesting. That integration process was
and there were like Arabs who went to the church as well. Like, it wasn't like an exclusively white evangelical thing. It was just like the majority of the members were converts from Protestantism. Like, that continued to be the base of their membership. Mm-hmm. And like that convert zeal, the EOC really represented when they came into Orthodoxy. Like, that's had a huge impact numerically. Like 70% of the priests in the Antiochian archdiocese, these might be old statistics, but 70% of their priests were converts.
Yeah. I've definitely seen that. It's interesting. Orthodoxy in America is an interesting thing that I'm sure there's some good writing about that I haven't read, but
I would definitely recommend turning to tradition if you're
interested. Yeah, I might have to check it out because I think there's something to I don't know, because Orthodoxy is like a minority. Like, the Catholic Church, obviously, like America is a Protestant country, basically.
Yeah.
Like the Catholics have played a role and they're there, but Orthodoxy primarily represents, like immigrant groups, and like Catholics you mentioned.
Have always had like large enclaves, at least. Like there's no Orthodox version of St. Louis where like everything,
right?
All the old money is Catholic, and like there's all this Catholic shit everywhere. There's
there's no like, and this is also kind of why like I do think it plays a role in why like more hippie Christian Protestants might be more likely to become Orthodox and Catholic in the US, in part because it's like the minority religion. It's kind of feels like it doesn't feel like it represents power in the US
it's like all. You never hear about like the Orthodox bishops like issuing proclamations that were shitty, even though
in the situation and
like I remember when gay marriage was stricken down, I was still converting to Orthodoxy, and like the bishops like made all the priests read a statement, basically, what you would expect them to say about it.
And
that was honestly like one of the things that kind of started to push me towards leaving, was that a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, obviously there are Orthodox people with much better views on that stuff, but like, there's a sense that Orthodoxy does represent. It doesn't represent power in the U.S., and so because of that, it's easy to forget that it represents power in other places.
And that it's still like very much a patriarchal religion. Like I definitely, I would move back between Tennessee and Ohio when I was in college. Just like I'd go back home to Ohio for the summers. And the church I went to there, I got the vibe that the priest was more liberal. Like he had I believe he was ethnically Russian. And was just, I got the vibe from him that he would be chill with women's ordination if it were to become an issue, but he knows that it's not, so he's just not going to push it.
Right. Sure.
Like when someone talked about women in leadership, that seemed to be his approach. But like,
well, it's a hard battle to fight, especially in the US, because it doesn't represent like, a majority of the church in any way too. So like,
and like, that's just going to lead to the same sort of, issues with the global church, and like that would introduce schism potentially, which is a very big deal to the Orthodox, like because there's this notion that like the institution is the true Church of Christ. Like this spiritual authority rests within this specific institution, and if the continuity with the institution is damaged, then like the whole thing is cut off.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Which is hard. Like, it's hard because I'm sympathetic to that fear of schism, because I think that's, because I think if you're a Christian, you should be fearful of schism. Like, it's not good. But also, like, I don't know, there's some issues that are worth pushing.
Yeah, it's like divorce. It's like,
it's
always regrettable, but like often for the best.
Yeah.
I hope you would accept that descriptor.
Oh yeah, I would, as a divorcee.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And like, I mean, it's not ideal, but the other hand is like, I understand the hesitance toward it, because I think a lot of Protestant traditions are addicted to schism. Like Baptists are just addicted to schisming. Like, there's 1,000 millions of Baptist denominations, and and that's not good. But like, I do think that the Orthodox Church probably deserves some challenging, especially. I think the Greek Orthodox I don't understand the politics of this super well, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there's tension between the Greek and Russian Orthodox churches right now over politics, right? Aren't they like not in a communion or something? I don't remember exactly how they're doing it.
I'm not sure about that specific situation right now. There have been issues with like temporary like excommunication, but like they'll still remain in communion with other bishops who are in communion with the original bishops. So like by the transitive property, you would think they would be in communion, but apparently that's not how that works. It's complicated. Like the jurisdictional politics are very Byzantine, and when you get to the United States, and everything is connected to these ethnic communities who all brought their own churches with them from the old country.
Yeah,
it's like even more complicated.
Right, because you have like, and I think it's funny you said it's very Byzantine. That's a funny little pun. Yeah, because there's the Byzantine Orthodox Church, but
Byzantine chant. It's like
there you go. But yeah, you have like somebody who's like, okay, they're Greek Orthodox because they're from Greece, and then you have a Russian Orthodox person and they're from Russia, and then they both immigrate because of wars, because of whatever. They both land in somewhere in Tennessee. They need a church, and they end up either in a church that they don't technically belong to, like a Greek one and a Russian person has to attend, or end up with two separate Orthodox churches that technically belong to different geographical
right. They're like under
authorities. Yeah, but they're technically down the street from each other or something. It's very strange. Yeah.
And it largely depends which one of those happens. Largely depends on how many Greeks and Russians there are, and like whether it's more practical to assimilate or to like have your own community. Because there's also a Greek Orthodox Church in Memphis that is predominantly non-convert, I believe. Certainly, like there's more Greek people in Memphis than there are Arab Christians.
Yeah, well, and I think that's something that I guess I don't know enough about, but the relationship, especially like with Russia, with current geopolitical events, that's a tension I know with a lot of the Orthodox Church.
Well, especially I mean, like Ukraine is also an Orthodox country. Like there's predominantly anyway, and like it's the church in both countries like tends to be supportive of the powers that be in that country, and like there's an interesting history to this in that the Russian Orthodox community in Japan, what was allowed to exist, prayed for the Emperor of Japan during the Russo-Japanese War. Like there was sort of this which chapter in Romans is it?
Yeah. I know what you're referring to.
Yeah. There's sort of that notion to it traditionally, and like that has often meant that the church in those countries is in bed with whoever is in power, and in Russia right now, like that is not a great look, to say the least.
No. Well, and that's I think what I have nothing. I don't think this is all Orthodox or whatever, but that's something I've always struggled with Catholic and Orthodox stuff, and why I still am kind of just Protestant. They do kind of end up in this weird relationship with the state that I don't love. Now, that being said, I'm an Anglican, and we've got our own versions of that for sure, but I don't know.
Why are there so many Anglicans in all these former British colonies? That's weird.
Whoa, what's going on there? Yeah, the way I like justify it in my head with relation to the English crown is that technically the Episcopal Church split over that, because they supported the Republican government, so that's cool. It's just now we're a state church of the evil American empire now. So
I mean,
cool. Awesome.
Bush Senior was Episcopalian among like many other prominent representatives of American evil. Isn't there like a stained glass window of Robert E. Lee at the National Cathedral or something?
That sounds right. Yeah, I think that's true.
Or like one donated by him or something.
We've got some issues.
I mean, they have National Cathedral. Like I feel like that speaks for itself, right? Like,
oh yeah, I mean,
like that,
the Cathedral of the U.S. is Episcopalian, but I don't know, and I that's something I've just like been working through, because I think I'm more and more like radical in that front, where like I just do not think that the church should have a relationship with this state, and not even just because of the the kind of normal liberal, kind of point where it's like, oh, that churches shouldn't be legislating. Yeah. But it's also the other way around, that I kind of more and more believe the state's like a corrupting force.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And like, that is definitely like something I would associate more with like the Radical Reformation in terms of Protestant history.
This is why I like Hauerwas, because he's like one of the only guys in the main line that's making this point also. Because it's mostly radical reformers.
Yeah. The Anabaptists, man, like they had some points. Like I'll give them that.
Yeah, I'll give them that. Where do you land these days? Out of curiosity, just based off this history we've talked a bit about with you.
Kind of a Christmas and Easter Christian at this point.
Okay, yeah.
But the last church I attended regularly that didn't really survive COVID as a community was United Methodist.
Okay.
Very like hyper progressive United Methodist.
Like, yeah, how did they respond to God? Because that was 2019, was it, that they officially denounced gay marriage? They just ignored it?
I think. Yeah, no, they were never. They were always like very explicitly affirming. Like I first visited them, they had like a neighborhood event that I went to with my roommate, and like the first thing they told us was like, and we're very gay affirming. Like, and I'm like, I don't know if they thought my roommate and I were a couple, but like I still really appreciated that.
Yeah, I appreciate it either way.
For sure.
Actually, that's the definition of kind-hearted but maybe incorrect mainline lib stuff too. Is just seeing two guys and being like, "Hey, we're gay affirming, by the way."
Yeah.
Just in case,
Yeah, no, and I mean, like, honestly, like, it was going to, be part of the conversation sooner or later, and so, like, I think, they wanted me to know where they stood, and I appreciated their stance. Like, they,
no, it's good,
always super affirming, which is just not what I experienced in, like, my evangelical upbringing or in Orthodoxy, and I really appreciated that about them, but have not been connected with the church in the same way since.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I don't know the denomination too well, but I technically went to a Methodist college, and it was a big crisis in the college when I think it was in 2019 they officially said that they don't support gay marriage. Because I think the model before then was like a church by church basis, where like the priests could kind of decide their stance on that. And then they voted to crack down on it. And it was just a big deal because, there were a lot of people who were religion majors in that college who were planning to go into ministry and were gay.
Oh, yeah.
And part of the reason they chose the denomination was because the denomination was chill with that. And then they were freaking out like, oh shit, I've been getting trained in this denomination and I don't think I can belong here anymore. But
that's really shitty. Like,
yeah, it really sucks.
I mean, I know they always maintain this very self-consciously affirming identity in this particular congregation. And
that's
in
good.
Kind of their, like, they were a mission technically of another congregation. And that one, they had like Stations of the Cross paintings that were themed after LGBT history.
Oh, wow.
Which I didn't get to see in person, but like it seemed like a...
Yeah, that's very cool. All right, so you were in this United Methodist Church, was like the last church you were kind of going in before just kind of fell off around COVID. And then at college you were like at EOS, playing with the EOC a bit. I guess like kind of what is the Antioch.
It was not the EOC at that point, but it did with a congregation that did have like a history that went
right. That's right.
The EOC.
Yeah. So, I guess like how'd you get from point A to point B? Where's that kind of journey there, I guess?
I mean, I want to give an illustrative anecdote of what a shitty male feminist I am.
Okay.
To begin with, which is that I struggled with abortion for a while, just like how I felt about it. Like I was raised Southern Baptist, wanted to become Eastern Orthodox. Like, ethical prohibitions on abortion are like very strong in both of those religious communities.
Right.
But like I started to rethink it for a while, and the thing that finally flipped the switch in my mind and made me pro-choice was Louis C.K.'s special 2017. Which is like, in hindsight, like the worst possible way to arrive at that conclusion.
Oh,
it's just
man.
he opens the stat talking about abortion because he's like, I'm such a big comic, I can do this right now. And like basically like makes the case for being pro-choice in a way that's like very crass but direct and like has an internal logic to it that I was just like, that was when that final switch flipped for me. And that was the kind of voice I was listening to at that time that was like influencing my thinking on the matter.
Yeah, that anecdote is not aged well remotely, but that's hilarious.
Like literally the year that special came out. Like that was his last one before it was in major news outlets, you know, like
yeah.
But
man.
I did have some feminist leanings in college, and like honestly, going back and forth between Ohio and Tennessee, like I saw like the more chill liberal priest in Ohio and how he did things, and then I saw how Church in Memphis did things, and like one thing that stood out to me was that women never read the epistle at the Church in Memphis. I don't know if this was directed from the bishop or if this was like the choice of the priest or what. I never really asked about it, but like traditionally men do all the readings in church, but the only thing that's specifically set aside for men are the gospel reading and anything the priest does. Women are allowed to do the epistle reading. They're allowed to, do other readings in church, but like the gospel reading is like explicitly set aside for men. And so at the one in Ohio, they would only have men do the gospel reading, but everything else was open to women. The one in Tennessee, like everything was just sort of restricted to men, and it just started to bug me. And I started thinking like, I don't ultimately, like I saw that there are still battles to be had within Orthodoxy that like just aren't mine to fight. Like it felt really disingenuous to join myself to an organization when I also decided that I disagreed with it on some fundamental things. And it's an organization that demands obedience, and it's like you're already a part of that. Like, I can understand why you would choose to be defiant at points, but like, I can totally respect people who are in the Orthodox Church and who are queer or who are affirming and like want, or who are, women and just want to change these things about it. But at the same time, like I'm just an outsider coming in, and like, it was also just a really long process to convert, and just I'd gotten frustrated with it and come to the conclusion that it was time to leave. And then I just sort of returned to Protestantism because like I came to a sense of religion that like I think is more common to like people raised Orthodox, for example, or people who are Catholic or people who are Jewish sometimes, is that like this is the faith tradition that I've inherited and it's mine, and like I'll do with it what I want, and like I wasn't going to do that with someone else's tradition, but I felt like I had the right to do that with Protestantism. And there's already plenty of people who have gone before me and done exactly that, and have gone in really interesting directions. Some have gone much further than I would, but like it's a tradition that it's a tradition in its own right. I learned like there's this tradition with a capital T in Orthodoxy, the holy tradition that like preserves continuity with the ancient church, and it's like that's a really beautiful notion, but in practice it just leads to ossification. And like I like the dynamism of Protestantism, I guess. In a way I like that it can be prone to schism because like it speaks to like the strength of conviction that people have within it.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I was gonna say like that's everything you just kind of said was pretty relatable to me because I was flirting with Catholicism for a brief period.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
So what was
go ahead.
If you don't mind sharing, like how far did you go and like looking into it, and like what eventually made you stop?
Yeah. It was during COVID that I was really thinking a lot about Catholicism and a little before that, but I hadn't gotten the courage to go to mass. And then by the time COVID happened, I couldn't go to mass. So that's in part, I never really even attended it, but I was reading a lot about it. And, part of my attraction was, like I came to a lot of my political views and a lot of my religious convictions, even through like liberation theology, which is, a Catholic, at least Latin American liberation theology is Catholic. And Dorothy Day is still one of my favorite, figures in history. But
if Dorothy Day were a normative figure in Catholicism, I would become Catholic, but she's not.
Exactly. And that was a big part of it was that, the other side is like, there was all these hoops I had to jump through. So one of them is just that I was a divorcee, and there was a lot of shit that would cause if I wanted to get married again. It's just like, it'd be a whole headache of legal shit. And there was a part of me that just started getting really frustrated at that, where I was like, why do I have to fucking figure this whole legal thing out just so that I can like love God in a church? Yeah. And that made me mad. And I don't want to shit on like Catholicism to anyone who's listening who's in that world, but that was what I found incredibly frustrating. And then I also in college had a gay roommate. And around that, oh God, what was it? I think it was 2021, I think was the moment that kind of killed it for me officially. It was either, or no, it was either the end of 2020 or beginning of 2021. Pope Francis officially said that the church's stance on gay marriage will not be changing. Yeah. And, like I was like,
and this is the progressive pope. Like supposedly.
Yeah, this is the progressive pope, and my my lesbian roommate would never be able to go to this church. Yeah. And that was like what was going through my head. And I was just like, I don't know, like I understand that. And so I have that. Then I also have my kind of Calvinist side of my theology as well. And I justified that a bit because I follow someone on Twitter that I think you probably do too, who is, into Jansenism, into kind of the this mashup of Calvinism and Catholicism. So I was like, okay, there's a route for this. This exists. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, so I could maybe fit in with that. And then it's like, okay, but I'm going in and I'm disagreeing with the Catholic Church's views on abortion, on gay marriage, on all these things. And I'm a Calvinist. I'm not Catholic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it just kind of was like, it was the same thing as you were saying, where it's like, I don't want to join a tradition that I'm going to disagree with like 80% of it. That just doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
There still are like plenty of things from Orthodoxy that like influence my understanding of things. Like,
yeah.
A lot
Same
of
with Catholicism.
Is pretty profound. Like, I would say Maria Skobtsova is like a comparable figure in Orthodoxy to like what you were saying about Dorothy Day, to where like, if that were the normative figure, like I would join this in a heartbeat, but like she wasn't. And are you familiar with her?
Yeah, I know the name, but I'm not super familiar, I should say.
If it's not totally digital, I could just talk about her for a bit because she's a really fascinating figure.
You should. Go for it.
Okay. Let's kill some fucking time.
Let's do it.
This is definitely going to be just like a more casual conversation episode, but I'm here.
I'm totally fine with that.
Maria Skobtsova was a SR politician from Russia turned nun, turned theologian, who became like minister to like poor Russian emigre communities in Paris. And eventually, during the occupation of France by the Nazis, she would like help forge baptismal certificates for Jews so they could pass as Christian, and like did all this other shit to like help people flee persecution from the Nazi occupiers, and died in a concentration camp for it.
Wow.
So she is like considered, she was canonized as a saint in the Orthodox Church, kind of because of her martyrdom. But like you actually read her theology, because she wrote theology, and it is different from anything you've read before in a way that's like in conversation with kind of the vanguard of Orthodox theology at the time, which is just coming from a very different place than Protestant or Catholic theology. Mm-hmm. Like her piece on the mysticism of the human communion is one I will give a shout out to here, as just one I return to continually, and that like, I don't know, when I feel closer to believing in God, like really, really inspires me and inspires my view of God and of how we relate to God in humanity.
No, that sounds like a very cool figure. And I was going to mention just from that story, as it did strike me, her faking baptismal certificates, because, this is a bit of a problem with sometimes the rosy colored eyes we have toward Christians in Germany and France who were shielding Jews from the Nazis, because a lot of I think it's, I don't want to speak to anything concrete statistical or anything, like exactly where, how much this happened. But I know there was a lot of like, yeah, we're going to save this Jew from getting persecuted by baptizing them. And, then it's like, well, they are removing their Judaism.
And that was never the intention. Like for
yeah.
her, like,
and that's what struck me is she didn't just go, why not get baptized? She was like, I get why you're not getting baptized. And that's cool. Yeah. Those are the kind of figures that like keep Christianity compelling, cause I get really fucking frustrated with Christianity, like a lot.
No, completely. And it's like, there are times where I do tune out completely, but it's ultimately like, it's too much a part of me. And it's too like, there's this other side to it. There's like this counter hegemonic side that like exists in all these different situations. And like, it's really fucking inspiring.
Yeah.
Like that's the part I want to be a part of,
Yeah. I mean, I'm always moved by like St. Francis, like the OG medieval, right? That this, he's an example of this kind of like good Christianity. And it's frustrating that it's not always been that way. And it's often not that way. But like when it is that way, it's a really beautiful thing. But I don't know. I really like, though, your talk about just kind of embracing the Protestantism as a tradition from what you were raised as. Because, I mean, that's basically what happened with me. And even my return to the Episcopal Church, there were so many moments where it hit me where I was like, yeah, this is the denomination I belong in, even if I have a lot of issues with them. Because I didn't really, I got confirmed in the Episcopal Church, but like it didn't ever feel fully unnatural. Like, because I mean, like I grew up in a, like Reformed church, and we sung a lot of hymns, like traditional hymns. And as I'm singing them in the Episcopal Church, I'm like, oh, hey, I know these from my upbringing. And, there's something like just kind of high church that was floating around, even though I was, raised evangelical for the most part. It just felt like I was kind of embracing a more liberal version of exactly what I was raised with. And that was a good feeling, synthesizing it.
Yeah. Like ultimately I didn't want to bring all my Protestant baggage somewhere else, like there's so many places in Protestantism I can take it. And like growing up Baptist and then going to, I attended an ELCA church for a while and then a UMC church that I was talking about earlier. And I also went to an ACNA high school.
Oh, wow. Which, for those who do not know what the ACNA, because I know sometimes if somebody's not a religious listener and then we get into denomination talk, we start doing alphabet soup.
About like denominational politics here.
If you're not familiar, so the Episcopal Church is the Anglican Church in America, and then there is a split off from the Episcopal Church called the ACNA. That's the Anglican Church in North America, and did it split over the gay rights issue? Was that the main thing?
I think women's ordination initially, and then gay rights choice.
So they're the conservative.
It's a merger of like several groups that split from the Episcopal Church throughout history. Like going back to the 19th century, like there are people who felt that the liberal influence was too strong and wanted to, and like over time, these different groups that have split off merged into the ACNA, which is under the jurisdiction of Anglican bishops in Africa who are more conservative generally.
I did not know that they were under that jurisdiction. That's interesting.
Yes. And like formally under Anglican canon law, I don't think they're allowed to have jurisdiction there, but they do it. So that is a point of contention for sure.
Yeah.
So that's how they claim like sort of membership in the broader Anglican communion is through that, and like apostolic succession and everything else. Like all those aspects of Anglican theology are important to them, but also they lost the fight over women's ordination and gay rights. So
it's the I have like contempt toward the ACNA. I know there are good people in it, but I do because it's like half the fucking reason I joined the Episcopal Church is because it's gay affirming and because it has women priests, and then just like starting a separate denomination to get rid of that just like pisses me off when I think about it. But
which like the church my high school's part of also came out of a kind of charismatic tradition. Like they
were
like a non-denominational church that was eventually almost like a smaller scale version of the story of the EOC, right? It's like this non-denominational church like gets into that kind of restorationist impulse to like be part of authentic Christianity and concludes we need to be in communion with the larger church and one that's like rooted in history. And so they go for like either in this case Anglicanism.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's interesting of itself. I mean, I guess you could make the case because there's apostolic succession that it goes back, but I think it's kind of funny to me to imagine like we got to get back to the Acts church. You know, we should check out the Anglicans.
Yeah, like well, it's like they wanted to have that connection, but still be Protestant. You know, like
yeah, which
like,
is why I'm in it. But you know,
yeah.
like I wish there were more. Yeah, I know this is a loaded term too, but I wish there were more inclusive Orthodox church like denominations and churches. You know, like churches that stick to this impulse that you both of us kind of had here, and what kind of has driven a lot of this conversation to like be part of a tradition that goes back. You know, but also has like liberal aspects because I do believe that you can have an affirming theology or a theology that does not denigrate women without it being contradictory to the Bible or to historic theology and tradition. I think that's very possible. And I think it frustrates me that so few churches want to do that. Like when they go liberal, they start being like, well, you know, like maybe the Nicene Creed isn't that important or something. And rather than just being like almost kind of conservative liturgically and liberal in regard to social issues. Like that's, I think a lot of people actually want that. Maybe a lot of the people I follow on Twitter want that maybe, but
yeah. I mean, maybe it doesn't certainly like the real thing. I enjoy the, like, I can appreciate things that make you feel connected to a broader tradition. I've just sort of come to accept that's not like as much of a priority for me, I guess, as it used to be, because I've come to accept that like, whatever tradition you're in, like, is going to have had its innovations, and like we're in this, you know, American context where like specifically as like American Protestants, where like, you know, you'd see new people in church, you ask them what they're doing. Oh, we're church shopping. Like we're consumers of religion.
Yeah.
And like we have this approach to it that's like, you know, suits our identity as consumers, because like we have just so many different choices, and there was something appealing about being a part of something that's mostly just forced on people, you know, like you're baptized.
Yeah, that's not that. Yeah,
like in the Orthodox Church, like infants are baptized and chrismated and like fed communion. Like babies get a little sip of the wine with the bread in it.
Yeah.
And like there's like it's something that, you know, people spend their entire lives in, and like, but actually joining that of your own volition just requires commitments I wasn't going to make, and that like don't even necessarily reflect how Orthodoxy is lived among, you know, ordinary Greek or Russian or, you know, whatever people.
Yeah, because they were born into it, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Like one thing I actually struggled with in Orthodoxy was fasting, because the monks have had so much influence on like how, like what the official rules are for Orthodoxy, that basically there are mandated fasts every Wednesday and Friday from like all meat and dairy products.
Mm-hmm.
And like every Wednesday and Friday, and then for the entirety of Lent, and you know, for Advent, and that just becomes like, that was just something I really struggled with. Like I did not have, I can blame myself for it, my lack of self-control, you know, like that's totally fair. But at the same time, it's like, I'm not like, if I were just an ordinary Greek guy who got baptized, I would have a fucking hamburger on a Friday and think nothing of it.
Yeah.
I suppose.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, because I think when you convert to something, you want to own it. It feels really disrespectful to convert to something and then immediately start violating it.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why you got to convert to a completely liberal denomination that has no restrictions at all.
Yep. Like that's where I wound up, and like that, you know, like that's still broadly where I identify. I have been meaning to start going to church more regularly. It's just hard to get back into the habit of it.
It's hard for me to be in the habit of it, and I'm a confirmed Episcopalian.
Yeah.
You know, like
which is so weird, just how, like, since I grew up a PK, like it was so ubiquitous in my early life, so like omnipresent, like such a weird routine to break ever. Like, but I broke out of it, and now it's like it's hard to get back.
Same. Yep. Same. I mean, well, I'm not a pastor's kid, but same kind of.
Sorry,
situation.
again with the acronyms here.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, that was my subtle way of doing that. But I'm not a pastor's kid, but I, same thing. Where had a church attending upbringing, and when I fell out of attending church when I was like 18 or 19, it was a very weird thing where it was always like, I'll do it eventually, and then just didn't. But now I think one thing that I have liked about converting, like it's not even really a conversion, but getting confirmed in the Episcopal Church, and that being like the tradition I've just decided I kind of am in, is that I don't know, it hit me recently that I have not lost my status of being an Episcopalian if I haven't gone to church in a month.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of nice where it's not quite the same, but it feels like I've started to take on the relationship to it that like people with an ethnic identity attached to a religion will have, where it's just like, it's just what I am, and like, it is what it is. And if I fuck up for a couple months, that's fine. I'll get back and I will do it.
Like, God is merciful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's honestly, hard to good.
If I had fully converted to Orthodoxy, like I feel like there's an alternate version of me that's like managed to follow through with it and then is still in it, but like not particularly active or devout at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I would definitely I see the comfort in like just having an identity, which is why I just consider myself broadly Protestant, because like it anchors me in something, even though I'm not, particularly confident in anything I believe theologically. Like, I don't know, you talk about people on Twitter, like there are people I'm envious of how confidently they can assert themselves theologically. Like,
oh yeah, God, I feel that, because I mean my religious beliefs have always been like shaped by doubt. Like my loss of faith, my slow return to the faith came through like death of God theology.
Yeah.
You
a Peter Rollins guy?
I was a Peter Rollins guy, yeah.
Okay.
And I eventually left that, but I needed to go through a phase of, even if it's not true, it's still good, was kind of like the mentality I needed to have.
Yeah.
To get me there. But that's, and so that's the thing, is I've just kind of come to grips with the fact I'm always going to have like a really doubt-filled relationship with religion, but that's also like welcome in the church, in the right churches anyway. That's actually like maybe even a good thing, like being a skeptical person in the church is like maybe a role that people should play. And I've owned it to a point. I've mentioned this on shows before, but I have a Eastern Orthodox icon that I'm looking at right now that I own. That's a little icon of St. Thomas touching Jesus's wounds.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Who is, for those who don't know, considered kind of the patron saint of doubt, because he doubted, when Jesus appears to the disciples, he's like, you can't be real. And it takes until Jesus tells him to feel the wounds in his side and hands before he believes.
You also wrote a really good song about that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. The reason that story has really stuck with me too is because I had a pastor. And I was lucky enough to have an evangelical pastor who said a good thing, which is often rare when people talk about memories with the evangelical pastors. But he had said that, Thomas was an important figure because he was the only one who had gotten to touch the wounds. He's the only one that got that kind of intimate relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
And that's been really influential to me. I don't know.
That's beautiful. I think it's
well, I think we have hit like an hour and 20 or something like that, which is pretty good. Do you want to wrap up, or do you want to keep? I'm enjoying chatting, so I'm fine either way. But
I mean, is there anything else you'd want to talk about? Like,
nothing specific comes to mind, but I do like kind of how this turned into kind of more a personal conversation about religion. I kind of like that. So
yeah.
I
started, specifically talking about this one group that interests me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was a group I'm only tangentially connected to, but still like played a meaningful role in my spiritual development. Like, there's still parts of Orthodoxy that like really appeal to me.
Important to you. Yeah. Well, I think there's something to like traditions that you pull from but don't fully identify with.
Yeah.
I think that that's probably more common than a lot of like religious writers usually let on to, but you know, like I have been very much influenced by a lot of thinking from the Catholic world, from the Orthodox world, from, you know, it's good to pull from that stuff. I'm an ecumenicist, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I'm ecumenical Protestant, I guess is how I'd say it. Like,
well, I really enjoyed this like little conversation about the EOC and kind of your personal faith, getting into that. So yeah, I guess we could probably wrap up here. Do you have anywhere that you would like people to like follow you on or whatever?
I'm still on Twitter. As of time of recording, that is a website that exists. And you can follow me at gross_online. I don't post very often, but I'm a fun guy to have around. I'll be your
he joins Twitter Spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll join your Twitter space maybe if my phone isn't dying. Like,
awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Joseph. This was a blast. So,
all right, thank you.
We'll have to have you on again.
Yeah, no. If there's anything you'd want me to talk about, like, let me know.
Absolutely.